Hey, that light at the end of the tunnel, guess what? That's not heaven. That's the C train! Daredevil, released in 2003 and is directed by Mark Steven Johnson, who has also directed such films like Simon Birch, When in Rome, Killing Season, and Ghost Rider, which explains a lot. And this movie is starring Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Michael Clark Duncan, Colin Farrell, Joe Pantoliano, and Jon Favreau. Little Matt Murdock was blinded as a teenager, but the chemicals that took away his eyesight heightened all of his other senses. So little Matt Murdock trained his body to where the entire city of New York became his playground. Now, as an adult, he is a lawyer by day, but when the court system doesn't provide justice in the courtroom, he dons the moniker Daredevil at night to seek out the final justice. And he's getting ever so close to stopping all of crime in New York City because he is getting close to the kingpin of crime himself. So I'm talking about Daredevil today. This was a decision I made because today is the 20th anniversary of this film's release. And how crazy is that? I remember going to the theater and watching this for the very first time on opening day. I had heard about Daredevil. I saw him like in the Spider-Man cartoon. I thought he was cool, but after watching this movie, I really love Daredevil. Like, this movie is the reason why Daredevil is one of my favorite Marvel characters. Because he's basically the Batman of Marvel Comics, and that's really because of Frank Miller when he got his hands on Daredevil. First, actually, did all these Daredevilish things, then when he went over to DC and did things like The Dark Knight Returns, that's where we get the concept of Batman that we have nowadays. So, I mean, they're basically the same character, all thanks to Frank Miller. Daredevil, of course, did it first. And I know this movie gets panned a lot. There are a lot of very cheesy things in here, things that didn't age well, and I definitely get that, and I definitely understand that, but I actually really love this movie. This is one of my favorite superhero films that, again, sparked my love of superheroes and superhero films, and I love the concept of this character that has this handicap. He can't see very well, but he heightens all of his other senses. He works out, he trains, and he makes himself a badass with everything else that he has. I love when characters do that. Here they really go all in on the hyper sonar senses that he has, where it's kind of like a superpower. I do prefer that they tone it down a little bit, like what they did in the Netflix Daredevil series, where there is no sonar that he can see things or whatever. But here it's a superhero film. We have to have some type of superhuman power, so here you go, Ben Affleck, Matt Murdock, there you go. Now, I had every intention of doing a watch-along of this movie. I've actually never seen the director's cut, and I watched it for the very first time today for this review. But life and how it happens, I just didn't have time to sit down and do one. Doing a watch-along takes a lot of time in the editing process, and with all the shit that's going on, I'll let you know that someone plowed into my car in my driveway a couple of weeks ago and completely totaled it, and it was a hit and run. They ran off and left their van in my ditch. It was pretty crazy. The house wasn't damaged. We weren't hurt because we were asleep. This was 3 o'clock in the frickin' morning. So I've been dealing with that a lot, and it's been pretty stressful, but finally got a new car. That's all set aside. Everything's done. That situation's done. Now I can get back to fully devoting myself to editing and recording for all of you people. And I'll say it again, I love this movie, but in the theatrical cut version. This director's cut version is so long and it's so boring. Everything is dragged out. The pacing is off. It is slow. There is no life to it because they're plugging in this storyline of this drug dealer who's framed for murder that really doesn't play into anything, which is why it was cut for the theatrical version. I prefer that. I like that. It plays into nothing. We don't need it at all. So why is it here? Watching both versions, the theatrical cut, which I have seen many times, I would watch that thing on repeat 20 years ago, and then watching the director's cut for the first time today, it's just it's a masterclass in the importance of editing. You can go through the filming process and think you're doing something great and everything makes sense on camera and on paper, but then when you get into the editing room and you see the pacing and you see the flow of the entire movie, you can see what's not working, and Batman when things feel off from the story and the energy that you're trying to give off. That's why editors exist, and that's why I love editors. Editors are amazing. They save every single movie. Now, many years before he donned another cowl with a bunch of horns, Ben Affleck, instead of being Batman, was first Daredevil, very much like Frank Miller with Daredevil and then going on to The Dark Knight Returns. And I will say he's gotten better with age. He is a fantastic Batman. He is one of the best Batmans that we've ever had. Him as Daredevil, he's kind of a young little prick. He's learning the ropes. He's learning how to use his body on camera. He's learning about the whole filmmaking process. There are a lot of decisions in here that are coming from someone who's just starting out in the acting world, maybe for a couple of years. So good for him that he met his future wife and the mother of his children in this movie. I mean, I guess they're not married anymore, and he's kind of a depressed person now, but, you know, this was a big moment in his life where he met someone that was very important for him, so this movie has a pretty substantial part in his life. It's also one of the reasons why he stayed away from superhero and comic book films for so long, and I think this movie is part of the reason why we got that Ben Affleck meme when it was during that interview for the press junket for Batman v Superman, and you just zoom in on Ben Affleck, who's just staring off into space like, oh, critics are hating this, people are hating this again, it's Daredevil all over again. This guy has just been through so much when it comes to the superhero genre. I feel for this guy in this sense. Jennifer Garner, I think, tries her damnedest in this role. I have previously reviewed Elektra, which is, it's a shit movie, but I think Jennifer Garner is great in the role of Elektra, even though it's another whitewashing situation here. They give her the greenest contact lenses I have ever seen, but she's doing flips. This would have been right around the time she's coming off of Alias, so she's making a name for herself, and she's killing it. She's doing a whole bunch of her stunts. She's doing the sigh twirlings and all that stuff. She's great. I think she's great in this movie, and they have great chemistry. You can see that sparks are flying between these two people. Now, one of the reasons why I like the theatrical cut more than the director's cut is because the director's cut leaves out the sex scene that these two characters have. In the theatrical cut, they do have that, and it's a moment where she says, stay with me, so that that line, again, later on at the funeral has way more impact when he says it. It's a beautiful moment between two characters that are in love with each other, so for the director's cut to just completely wipe that out, there has to be something there that's building these characters' love and devotion for each other. And that's why the breakup and the separation is so heartfelt in the theatrical cut, in my opinion. Michael Clarke Duncan plays the Kingpin, the original Kingpin in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or at least the pre-MCU. And I think he's a pretty damn good Kingpin. He has the size. I know at the time people were like, well, he's not white. In the comics, Kingpin is white. What are we doing here? These characters should go far beyond the color of your skin. So for the studio to say, no, we're going with Michael Clarke Duncan because he's the perfect actor for this role regardless of his heritage, that's what we should do. That's what all of us should do. And he is a presence. He is the final boss. He is the guy that everyone fears. And in both versions, the director's cut and the theatrical cut, both of them pretty damn well. The director cut, though, shows way more of Colin Farrell just doing weird-ass shit. In the theatrical cut, I prefer it more because it's cut down. We don't get a ton of it. We get the idea he's just a fucked-up lunatic. In the director's cut, we see him walking through airport security, and he's being all creepy and all weird and shit. Why? Because he's weird, you know. This was back in the early 2000s. The concept of the MCU was many years out, and we were still feeling the effects of The Matrix and how black and all leather stuff looks really cool, so that's what we're going to do in all of our other action movies. All of our costume design is going to be very leather-based and very dark and blacks and all that. So Daredevil's suit is like a leather motorcycle jacket that's in like this very dark red. I actually kind of like it, but it's definitely not the most maneuverable, I guess, if that's a word. If it's not a word, I'm making it a word because it sounds right. And Bullseye, he is not wearing his spandex suit because, again, we didn't want to do spandex back in the early 2000s with our comic book films. But you need to have the bullseye on the head, so how are we going to get that? Well, let's not do a hat or a helmet. That just looks stupid, so let's just scar it. Let's just scar it on his head. That's badass. Colin Farrell is so freaking weird. At this point, he was establishing himself in the mainstream media. He did Minority Report. He did Phone Booth that he was great in, but then this movie comes out we're all just like, what are you doing? I mean, it definitely looks like you're having the most fun out of everybody, but you're just fucking weird. I think in both versions, when this movie stays on the Matt Murdock in real life person character, I think it excels. When we get to the Daredevil character doing CGI jumps that defy gravity, that's where this movie loses me. Because again, we're going off the Matrix, and we had people defying gravity and doing all these crazy jumps that you couldn't do in real life. But here comes along Daredevil that's trying to convince you that we're setting this up in a very realistic setting. But then you have people like jumping up the side of buildings, people jumping from a lower level up to a higher level that's like 30 feet away. That's not gonna happen. You're not gonna do that, especially in a leather motorcycle suit. I think this movie was just fine for the time. This was 2003, so we just had Spider-Man the year before. X-Men came out a couple of years prior, so the superhero genre was just kicking off and things were starting to come out. So in terms of the growing popularity of the superhero genre, I think this film is pretty important. It's part of the early days. And I have a ton of appreciation for this movie. It sparked my love of the character of Daredevil to where I read the comics, I would get a couple of the action figures, I would look up the cartoon episodes of Spider-Man and anything that Daredevil was in. So for any film that inspires me to look up more about a character, I have to give it 2 thumbs up. In terms of going back and forth between the theatrical version and the director's cut, the director's cut is not needed. The pacing is lacking. It is terribly slow. The theatrical version, the pacing is fast. There is an energy behind it. They have music montages of his training, and the voiceover, it has more energy. It's clipping along more. It's edited more, and I appreciate it more. This is one of the few times where I'm like, the director's cut, don't even bother with this movie. I would stick with the theatrical. It's way better. I'm gonna give Daredevil 3 out of 5 Blu-rays.
Not exactly what I had in mind, but not bad.
So guys, if you've seen Daredevil, what did you think about it? Or if you've never seen it before and you stumbled across it because of this video, then comment below, let me know what you thought about it. And as always, if you like what you see here, if you like my take on movies, then hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that bell. See you the next time I'm releasing my next movie review. So guys, I will see you next time on the channel, but in the meantime, be well, be good to each other, and go watch a movie. Take care, guys.